What if the most prosperous world in human history vanished almost overnight, and almost nobody saw it coming? 7 days before the Great Flood, the world did not look like it was approaching an ending. There were no warning sirens, no signs hanging in the sky, no sense of panic spreading across the land. To the people who lived there, it was simply another ordinary morning. The sun rose over fields that stretched for miles. Families gathered for breakfast. Merchants prepared for another day of trade. Children ran through villages and open spaces, laughing and playing as they always had. Life moved forward with the quiet confidence of a civilization that believed tomorrow would arrive exactly as expected. Imagine waking up in a world where people measured their lives not in decades, but in centuries. Grandparents could still share stories with descendants several generations removed from themselves. Knowledge accumulated over lifetimes far longer than anything familiar today. Skills were refined over hundreds of years. Communities grew with a sense of permanence that is difficult for us to imagine. To many, the future seemed limitless. The earth itself appeared generous and abundant. Crops flourished. Herds multiplied. Rivers provided water for growing settlements. Across the landscape, people built homes, established families, and pursued ambitions that stretched far beyond a single lifetime. It was a world full of activity, innovation, and confidence. Yet hidden within this ordinary day was a remarkable contrast. While most people focused on their routines, one man carried a burden unlike anyone around him. Noah had received a warning that changed everything. According to the biblical account, he knew that the world standing around him would not continue forever. While others planned years ahead, Noah was preparing for something they could barely imagine. The strange thing is that the difference was not immediately visible. If you had walked through a village that morning, you might not have noticed anything unusual. The markets remained busy. Conversations filled the streets. Families discussed future plans. Life looked stable, predictable, secure. That is what makes this moment so fascinating. The people living in Noah's generation were not waking up each day expecting history to end. They were building careers, raising children, and making decisions based on the assumption that life would continue as it always had. In many ways, they were just like us. They worried about daily responsibilities. They celebrated milestones. They looked forward to opportunities waiting beyond the horizon. And yet, according to the biblical narrative, they were living during the final week of an entire world. Noah understood something that others did not. Every sunrise brought the countdown closer. Every ordinary conversation unfolded against a backdrop that nobody else seemed to recognize. The contrast could not have been greater. One man was preparing for a future that everyone else dismissed. 7 days remained. 7 ordinary days. 7 mornings filled with familiar routines. 7 evenings before a chapter of human history would close forever. But before we can understand why the flood mattered, we first need to understand the world that existed before it, a world so remarkable, so prosperous, and so mysterious that its memory continues to capture imaginations thousands of years later. To understand why so many people ignored Noah's warning, we first have to understand the world they believed would never disappear. By every visible measure, it may have seemed like humanity was thriving. The landscape was filled with signs of growth and stability. Settlements expanded across fertile regions. Families grew larger with each generation. Knowledge accumulated over lifetimes that stretched far beyond what most people experience today. Imagine living in a society where a skilled craftsman could spend centuries perfecting his work, where wisdom was passed directly from ancestors who had personally witnessed events that, for us, would feel impossibly distant. In such a world, experience became a valuable resource unlike anything we know. The longer people lived, the more knowledge they gathered, and the more confident they became in their understanding of the world around them. Daily life likely revolved around agriculture, construction, trade, family relationships, and the management of growing communities. Fields produced food. Herds were carefully maintained. Homes were built not merely for a few decades of use but for generations that would remain connected for centuries. The rhythms of life followed the cycles of planting and harvest, work and rest, celebration and responsibility. People woke each morning expecting continuity. The future appeared reliable. Many Bible readers imagine the ancient world as primitive, but the biblical record suggests something far more complex. These were not isolated groups struggling to survive. They were organized societies with traditions, skills, and systems that had developed over long periods of time. Human creativity had room to flourish. Craftsmen refined their trades. Builders improved their techniques. Families established lasting legacies. Communities developed identities that were strengthened with every passing generation. As Noah looked around, he saw the same prosperous world everyone else saw. He saw neighbors planning for the future. He saw people investing their time and energy into projects that would take years to complete. He saw families making decisions based on the assumption that tomorrow would resemble yesterday. Nothing about the appearance of society suggested that a dramatic change was approaching. That is what makes this period so fascinating. The closer we look, the more normal it seems. People worked. They gathered with relatives. They celebrated important milestones. Children learned from parents. Friends shared meals and conversations. Life moved forward with confidence and purpose. Yet, hidden beneath that confidence was a dangerous assumption. Most people believed that because life had always continued, it always would. The stability they experienced every day became evidence, in their minds, that stability would never end. Noah stood apart because he no longer viewed the world through that lens. While others saw permanence, he saw a countdown. While others trusted what they could observe, he trusted the warning he had received. And with each passing day, the gap between Noah and the rest of society grew wider. The remarkable world surrounding him appeared stronger than ever. Fields remained green. Homes remained full. Markets remained active. But the very prosperity that made people feel secure may have also made them less willing to believe that anything could ever change. 6 days remained, and almost nobody seemed concerned. The world continued to move forward exactly as it always had, unaware that history was quietly approaching a turning point unlike anything humanity had ever known. 5 days remained, and for most people, life continued according to familiar routines. If you had walked through a settlement during those final days, you would not have found a population preparing for disaster. You would have found ordinary people living ordinary lives. The sounds of work filled the air from sunrise to sunset. Families gathered around meals. Parents taught skills to their children. Neighbors exchanged news and advice. Every part of society seemed built upon the expectation that tomorrow would arrive just as predictably as today. One of the most fascinating questions about this ancient world is not how it ended, but how people actually lived before that ending came. The biblical record provides only glimpses, yet those glimpses suggest a society unlike anything in modern history. Imagine growing up knowing that many of the older people around you had lived for hundreds of years. Wisdom was not stored in books alone. It existed in living memory. Stories could be passed directly from generation to generation without traveling through dozens of intermediaries. Knowledge accumulated slowly but steadily, carried by individuals who had decades, even centuries, to learn from experience. Families were likely larger than most people today can imagine. Generations overlapped in ways that would seem extraordinary to us. Grandparents, great-grandparents, and descendants far down the family line could all exist within the same community. This created strong connections to the past. Traditions remained alive because those who remembered their origins were often still present to tell the story. Daily responsibilities remained important. Food had to be grown. Animals had to be cared for. Homes needed maintenance. Communities required cooperation. Yet long lifespans may have changed the way people thought about time itself. Projects could be planned decades in advance. Skills could be refined over many years. Ambitions could stretch far beyond the limits that most people experience today. In many ways, this may have felt like a golden age of human potential. People had time to learn, time to build, and time to pursue goals that required remarkable patience. The world around them appeared stable and dependable. Seasons followed familiar patterns. Communities expanded. families prospered. There was little reason, from a purely human perspective, to expect dramatic change. That confidence shaped how people viewed the future. They planned for years ahead. They invested in long-term projects. They assumed the world they knew would continue to support their hopes and expectations. Meanwhile, Noah watched the same activities unfold around him. He saw people planting crops that they expected to harvest months later. He saw families discussing plans that extended years into the future. He saw neighbors making decisions based on a future they fully expected to reach. None of these actions were unusual. In fact, they were perfectly reasonable if the world was going to continue as it always had. But Noah carried knowledge that changed the meaning of every ordinary scene. What looked like security to everyone else looked temporary to him. What appeared permanent seemed fragile. The contrast grew sharper with every passing day. The people around him continued building lives rooted in confidence, unaware that the foundation beneath that confidence was about to be tested. 5 days before everything changed, the ancient world was still busy, productive, hopeful, and full of plans for the future. That may be the most remarkable detail of all. History's greatest turning point was drawing closer, yet life still felt completely normal. 4 days remained, and by now Noah's presence had become impossible to ignore. For years he had worked on a project that must have seemed strange to nearly everyone around him. Day after day, season after season, while neighbors focused on their farms, businesses, and households, Noah continued building. The structure stood as a visible reminder of a warning that most people had chosen to dismiss. That raises an important question. Why did so many people refuse to take him seriously? The answer may have been simpler than we often imagine. From their perspective, Noah's message did not match reality. They looked around and saw stability. They saw productive fields, growing families, and thriving communities. The world appeared dependable. Nothing in their daily experience suggested that an extraordinary event was approaching. Human beings naturally trust what they can see. If the skies looked normal, if the seasons continued as expected, and if life remained comfortable, then Noah's warnings may have sounded increasingly unreasonable. After all, many of the people listening to him had spent centuries observing the same patterns. Their confidence was built upon long experience. Every passing year that looked ordinary may have reinforced the belief that tomorrow would be ordinary as well. It is easy to criticize them from a distance, but their reaction reflects a deeply human tendency. People often struggle to imagine a future that looks dramatically different from the present. We assume that because something has never happened before, it never will. We trust familiar patterns. We rely on past experience. That mindset shaped the world around Noah. While he prepared for a future few could envision, everyone else remained anchored to the assumption that life would continue uninterrupted. Imagine walking through a busy settlement during those final days. Conversations filled the streets. Plans were being made for upcoming harvests. Parents discussed the futures of their children. Craftsmen focused on their work. Merchants considered new opportunities. Everywhere people looked, they found evidence supporting their belief that life was moving forward normally. Then there was Noah. His actions challenged that belief. Every board added to the great vessel represented a question people preferred not to ask. What if he was right? What if the future was not as predictable as everyone assumed? Yet considering those questions required humility. It required admitting that certainty might be misplaced. For many, it was easier to continue with familiar routines than to confront an uncomfortable possibility. Noah's family stood with him through this difficult period. While much of society moved in one direction, they moved in another. They committed themselves to preparation while others remained focused on continuation. The contrast became sharper with each passing day. The remarkable thing is that nobody was being forced to ignore Noah. The vessel itself stood in plain sight. His message was not hidden. The opportunity to listen existed. But listening and believing are not the same thing. 4 days before history changed forever, the world remained confident in itself. The evidence of normal life seemed overwhelming. And that confidence may have been the very reason so few people recognized how close they were to a moment that would redefine everything. 3 days remained, and beneath the appearance of prosperity, deeper problems had begun to shape the character of society. This is the part of the story that is often overlooked. When people imagine ancient civilizations, they tend to focus on achievements, growth, and success. Yet every civilization is defined not only by what it builds, but also by the values that guide it. According to the biblical account, the issue was not that people had become skilled, productive, or successful. The issue was that something had gone wrong beneath the surface. Outwardly, life continued as normal. Fields were cultivated. Homes were maintained. Communities functioned. Families gathered around tables at the end of long days. From a distance, everything appeared stable. But stability and health are not always the same thing. A society can look strong while deeper problems quietly spread through its foundations. Noah saw those problems more clearly than most. While others focused on comfort and success, he recognized a growing separation between humanity and the values that had originally guided it. People increasingly trusted their own judgment above everything else. Confidence became self-reliance. Self-reliance became pride. Pride made it difficult to accept correction. The more successful society appeared, the less interested many people became in examining where that path was leading. This pattern is not unique to the ancient world. Throughout history, prosperity has often created the illusion that moral questions no longer matter. When life feels comfortable, people assume everything is fine. When communities are growing and opportunities seem endless, it becomes easy to ignore warning signs. That may have been part of what Noah witnessed around him. The world was filled with activity, but not necessarily wisdom. It was filled with ambition, but not always humility. It was filled with confidence, but not always understanding. Day after day, Noah watched people invest enormous energy into improving their lives while paying little attention to the deeper condition of their hearts. The tragedy was not ignorance. The warning existed. The opportunity to reflect existed. The choice to consider a different path existed. Yet most people remained focused on immediate concerns. The future felt secure enough that deeper questions could always be postponed until later. Tomorrow seemed guaranteed. There would always be more time. 3 days before everything changed, that belief still shaped the thinking of nearly everyone around him. Children continued learning from their parents. Merchants continued their trade. Builders continued their projects. Families continued making plans for years and decades ahead. Meanwhile, Noah and his family continued preparing. Every day brought them closer to a moment that would reveal which assumptions had been correct. The contrast between those two visions of the future could not have been greater. One was built upon visible circumstances. The other was built upon trust in a warning that many found difficult to believe. Yet, from Noah's perspective, the greatest danger was not the coming event itself. The greatest danger was how completely normal everything still seemed. 3 days remained, and the world continued moving forward with confidence, unaware that its most important opportunity to change course was rapidly slipping away. 2 days remained, and by now the great vessel could not be ignored. Whether people passed it on the road, discussed it in their homes, or heard stories from travelers, everyone knew about Noah's project. It stood as a physical reminder of a message that challenged the assumptions of an entire civilization. That is what made this moment so remarkable. The warning was not hidden in secret writings. It was not whispered among a small group of followers. It existed in plain sight. Every beam, every section of the structure, every day of labor raised the same uncomfortable question. What if Noah was right? Yet most people found reasons to dismiss that possibility. Some likely viewed the vessel as an odd obsession. Others may have considered it a waste of effort. Many probably believed that even if Noah was sincere, sincerity alone did not make a prediction true. After all, they had a lifetime of evidence supporting their view of reality. The skies remained familiar. The land remained productive. Communities continued to function. Nothing appeared to justify such extraordinary preparation. Human nature often prefers explanations that preserve comfort. When faced with a warning that requires change, people frequently search for reasons to maintain the status quo. The ancient world was no different. It was easier to explain Noah away than to reconsider deeply held assumptions about the future. Meanwhile, Noah and his family continued their work. They were approaching the final stage of preparation. For them, the vessel was not merely a construction project. It represented trust, obedience, and readiness. Every task completed brought them one step closer to a future that few others believed was coming. Imagine the contrast. Outside, life moved forward as usual. Farmers tended fields. Merchants organized goods. Families planned celebrations and discussed future opportunities. Inside Noah's household, however, every day carried a different weight. Time was no longer an abstract concept. It was a countdown. The difference between 2 days and 1 day mattered. Every remaining hour had significance. Yet despite that urgency, the surrounding world remained remarkably calm. People still woke each morning expecting continuity. They still made plans extending months and years into the future. They still viewed the vessel as an unusual feature of the landscape rather than a sign demanding serious reflection. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not why Noah built the ark. The greater mystery is why so many people felt no need to ask deeper questions about it. Curiosity alone could have led them closer to understanding. Reflection alone could have challenged their certainty. But confidence is powerful. When people become convinced that their understanding of reality is complete, they stop searching for answers. Noah's generation appeared to have reached that point. The evidence stood before them, visible and impossible to overlook, yet familiarity had drained it of significance. The vessel had become part of the background. 2 days before history changed, the ark remained exactly where it had always been, waiting. Noah saw it as preparation. His family saw it as hope. Most of the world saw it as nothing more than a strange monument to a warning they no longer took seriously. 1 day remained, and nothing about the world seemed to suggest that it was living through its final ordinary day. The morning began like countless mornings before it. People woke with plans already forming in their minds. Farmers looked toward their fields. Craftsmen prepared their tools. Merchants considered opportunities waiting in nearby communities. Families gathered for meals and discussed the future. Everywhere, life continued according to familiar patterns. If someone had walked through the settlements of that time, they would have seen confidence, routine, and expectation. They would have seen a civilization fully invested in tomorrow. That is what makes this day so unforgettable. It was completely normal. The biblical account later describes people eating, drinking, marrying, and carrying on with everyday life. There is nothing unusual about those activities. In fact, they represent the ordinary rhythms of a healthy society. People were building relationships, caring for families, and participating in community life. The tragedy was not that people were living normal lives. The tragedy was that normal life had become a distraction from deeper realities. The future felt so certain that few saw any reason to question their assumptions. Meanwhile, Noah's perspective was entirely different. For him, every ordinary moment carried extraordinary significance. The conversations he overheard, the routines he observed, and the plans people discussed all sounded different because he knew something they did not. What others viewed as the beginning of another chapter, Noah understood as the closing page of an era. Imagine standing in a crowded marketplace while knowing that nearly everyone around you believes the future will unfold one way when it is actually moving towards something entirely different. That was the world Noah inhabited. He watched people confidently prepare for seasons they would never experience. He listened as long-term plans were discussed with complete certainty. He observed a society that felt secure because it measured reality by what could be seen. Yet the most important truth remained invisible to nearly everyone. As the day progressed, the contrast grew sharper. Outside, daily life continued uninterrupted. Inside Noah's household, preparation neared completion. His family had spent years trusting a warning that many dismissed. Now they stood at the edge of seeing that trust tested. The hours moved forward quietly. No dramatic signs appeared to interrupt the routines of the wider world. No sudden changes forced people to reconsider their assumptions. Everything still felt familiar. Everything still felt safe. And perhaps that was the greatest challenge of all. Human beings often expect major turning points to announce themselves with unmistakable signals. We assume that if something important is coming, everyone will recognize it. Yet history repeatedly shows the opposite. Some of the most significant moments arrive while people are busy focusing on ordinary concerns. As evening approached, the ancient world remained filled with activity, conversation, and expectation for the days ahead. Families settled into their homes. Communities prepared for another sunrise. The world looked stable. It looked successful. It looked permanent. But beneath that appearance, the final ordinary day was quietly drawing to a close. The next morning began quietly. At first glance, it seemed no different from countless mornings that had come before it. The horizon looked familiar. The routines of daily life were ready to begin again. Yet this day carried a significance unlike any other in human history. According to the biblical account, the period of waiting had reached its conclusion. Noah and his family entered the vessel they had spent years preparing. The long season of warning gave way to a season of fulfillment. Outside, the world still appeared calm. The remarkable thing is that there was no dramatic transition separating one era from the next. Life did not suddenly stop. Communities did not instantly abandon their routines. The ordinary world remained ordinary, at least for a time. That detail is important because it highlights how slowly major turning points can begin. History often changes before people realize it has changed. Imagine looking around that morning. Farmers could still see their fields. Merchants could still think about trade. Families could still discuss plans for the future. The assumptions that had shaped society for generations remained firmly in place. Most people believed tomorrow would resemble today because that belief had never failed them before. Yet something profound had already shifted. The opportunity to respond to Noah's warning had reached its final moment. What happened next is described in language that emphasizes both certainty and purpose. The period of preparation was complete. Noah no longer needed to keep building. He no longer needed to keep waiting. The time for action had arrived. For Noah and his family, this must have been an extraordinary moment. Years of trust, patience, and perseverance had led to this day. Every difficult conversation, every skeptical glance, every season spent working toward a future few believed in had brought them here. While the wider world continued following familiar routines, Noah crossed a threshold from preparation into fulfillment. The contrast between those inside and those outside grew sharper with every passing hour. Yet, from the perspective of ordinary observers, little seemed different. The sky remained above them. The land remained beneath their feet. Daily responsibilities still demanded attention. Everything visible appeared to support the belief that life would continue unchanged. This is what makes the story so powerful. The greatest difference was not found in the landscape. It was found in perspective. One group believed the future would follow familiar patterns. Another trusted that a new chapter was beginning. As the day progressed, the ancient world stood at the edge of transformation without fully recognizing it. The routines that had defined life for generations continued for a little longer. Conversations continued. Plans continued. Expectations continued. Yet beneath that appearance of normalcy, history was moving forward. The age Noah had known was reaching its conclusion. A new reality was beginning to emerge. The world still looked familiar, but familiarity can be deceptive. Sometimes the most important moments arrive quietly, hidden behind ordinary circumstances. And on that day, while much of humanity remained focused on business as usual, the final transition from warning to fulfillment was already underway. What happened after that moment transformed more than a single generation. According to the biblical narrative, the world Noah had known passed away, and with it disappeared an entire chapter of human history. Think about everything that was left behind. The familiar roads people traveled each day. The homes families had built over generations. The traditions, ambitions, plans, and expectations that once seemed so permanent. For centuries, people had lived as though their civilization would continue indefinitely. Yet history proved otherwise. The world they trusted was not as unchanging as they believed. Noah and his family emerged into a reality unlike anything they had previously experienced. The old world was gone. A new beginning stood before them. Every future generation would trace its story back to this moment. Every community, every nation, every family yet to come would exist because a small group chose to trust a warning when almost nobody else would. This is why the story continues to capture attention thousands of years later. It is not simply a story about an ancient event. It is a story about human nature. The people of Noah's time were not entirely different from us. They worked, planned, dreamed, and invested in the future. They wanted security. They wanted prosperity. They wanted their children to inherit a better world. In many ways, their hopes were the same hopes people carry today. Yet the account challenges an assumption that every generation eventually faces. What happens when comfort convinces us that tomorrow is guaranteed? What happens when success makes us believe that familiar patterns can never change? The ancient world serves as a reminder that appearances can be deceptive. A society may look strong while ignoring important questions. A culture may seem stable while drifting away from the values that sustain it. People may become so focused on immediate concerns that they overlook deeper realities standing directly in front of them. Noah's generation had access to a warning, but familiarity made it easy to dismiss. The extraordinary became ordinary. The remarkable became background noise. By the time the significance of the moment became clear, the opportunity to respond had already passed. That lesson reaches far beyond one period of history. It speaks to every generation that has ever lived. The story invites us to examine our assumptions, question our certainty, and remember that the future is not always shaped by what seems most obvious in the present. As we look back across the centuries, the most fascinating question may not be what the ancient world lost. The more important question is what we can learn from it. A civilization once filled with confidence believed it had endless time. Noah believed otherwise. History remembers which perspective proved correct. And that is why the memory of that lost world still endures, not merely as a story of the past, but as a reminder that wisdom often begins when we are willing to look beyond what appears normal and consider what truly matters.